Hello again, this is Steph Jeffries from NC State University, Department of Forestry and Environmental Resources. Here at the site to talk about the mysterious Bumpy Beech bark that we have. That's the name of the project, Mysterious Bumpy Beech Bark. Kind of a mouthful, but describes what we're seeing here. And remember in the last video I taught you how to identify American beech, right? So we're expecting a tree with very smooth pale gray bark, and looking at this tree behind me, right, it has the marcescent leaves, the tan leaves. It has the long pointed buds at the end, which contain next year's leaves. Okay, so I feel confident about this being a beech tree. What is different about this tree is it has this crazy bumpy beech bark. So I'm going to move the camera a little bit closer so you can see this up close, right? So this is a surface bumps that are on this tree, and it has gradations, like there's more definitely towards the bottom and fewer as you go up the trunk, but they are definitely present. When my colleagues, Drs. Jatan and Oten, came out with me to this particular site, and the video I just made of how to identify beech is at a tree that is right over there. So we have both smooth barked and bumpy barks in the same stand. And they looked at it carefully, and their conclusion was this is not an insect. So there's no insects or larvae or anything underneath this bark. But really, other than that, we know very little about what's going on here. And so I think this is the most exciting time to get involved in a scientific project, right? We have, as a scientist, I have this infinite curiosity about the natural world, and so I always am filled with questions like, so what is this bumpy beech bark? It could be something that is just a genetic anomaly, the same thing as eye color in people, right? It could be that there's just a genetic variant that has bumpy beech bark. We don't know if this is harming the tree or if it has no effect on the trees. We found trees in this stand that were dead that had a lot of the bumpy beech bark, but we don't know that it's a thing. Something that was suggested early on is that this could be an example of beech bark disease, but we've eliminated that as a possibility. Beech bark disease affects trees in the American beech range, up in New England primarily, and it has been found in North Carolina, but in the western part of the state. So I'm coming to you from the Piedmont, near Raleigh, North Carolina, and we don't have any evidence that beech bark disease has arrived in the Piedmont. It may one day eventually arrive, but it also doesn't look the same. It has these kind of lesions in the bark, some kind of open places where the bark has peeled away, and that's an insect. I'm gonna say this wrong, but I think it's an insect transmitted fungus that then infects the beech tree. If I'm wrong on that, I'll ask Dr. Jatan to fill us in on that. So right now there's a lot that we don't know about this phenomenon, but to me this is an exciting time for discovery. We have no idea if this is something that's common or whether it's really, pretty rare, just limited to trees in Raleigh. I suspect that it's found elsewhere because I have seen it elsewhere, and as I talked about this on social media, a lot of people said they'd noticed it too, and so we're using iNaturalist to gather data. I'm a new user to iNaturalist, so I don't know all of its tricks yet, but I'm really excited about it because you can take your photograph, right, of this bumpy beech bark and then put it up on iNaturalist, and it will geo-reference that photograph. So it will put a point on it'll put your photograph on a point on a map, and I can go into the project and see where you've seen bumpy beech bark. Before we get started, I think it's really important to note that it's just as important to see where this bumpy beech bark is not, as well as where it is, right? So if there's a blank spot on a map with no observations on iNaturalist, I don't know if it means that nobody's visited there to look for bumpy beech bark. I don't know if there's beeches in that part of the map, or maybe there is beech but it doesn't have bumpy beech bark. So I encourage you to use this as an opportunity to practice your identification skills for American beech, and then take observations, take photographs of the bark. You can add leaves if you want a little bit of confirmation for ID, and then identify the photo on iNaturalist as Fagus grandifolia. You can usually put in your photograph and ask for suggestions if you're new to tree ID. You now know everything you need to identify this as American beech, but a scientist will go on and confirm your observation so that you could be sure that your data is correct. And then if your photograph has bumpy beech bark, this is a little bit more complicated. So most of us will use our iPhones to submit our observations, but you have to go into the observations on a PC computer, open up that observation and add a tag. Okay, so there's a section for tags, and if you tag it bumpy beech bark, I'll be able to use that tag to search for all the observations we have in the database that are tagged bumpy beech bark. And that'll help us see just how widespread this is, if it's something that's limited to just a small area in the southeast, or if it's limited to Piedmont habitats. Maybe it's an urban phenomenon, we really don't know. But rather than be discouraged or flummoxed by what we don't know, I see this as a really exciting opportunity to learn. So I appreciate you joining me. Thanks a lot.